Territory of the Sinixic people. Do we have any additions to the agenda, deletions, or changes in order? Seeing and hearing none, any objection to the approval of the agenda? Seeing none, we're looking for approval of the minutes for March 7th, 2018. Are there any corrections or changes or additions or comments or edits or anything else? Any objection to the approval of those minutes? Seeing none, we have no presentation this evening. We do have a pretty full agenda, so I would ask that everyone work together to try to do good work and stay on point so that we can get out of here at a reasonable hour. So we're moving into 8.1, Secretary Treasurer McVeigh and Director of Planning and Operations, Mr. Pete Sabo, regarding the appointment of an architect for the Ecole Hammond Bay Elementary expansion.
So on page 6 of the agenda is a action sheet with a motion, but essentially staff are recommending that the board or the business committee appoint the same architects that have been working on the expansion of the gym at Hammond Bay for the addition. If there are any questions.
Trustee Higginson. Do we have a mover? Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Trustee Brennan. Did you want to speak to it at all, or?
It's pretty straightforward in the recommendation, and I don't feel like there's any. They've done good work for us in the past, and got a big agenda tonight, so
Get it done.
let's just get her done. Let's build that expansion.
Is there anybody who would like to speak to object to this particular motion? Seeing no one, I'll call the question, and all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We should slow down from 60 to 40K here. 8.2, Secretary Treasurer McVeigh regarding special education audit report.
So we've attached this to the agenda tonight to simply provide you with the formal report from the ministry that indicates our special ed audit was great. We were acknowledged for having wonderful practices in the district. There was absolutely no loss of funding. We've already talked about this, so if there are any questions, happy to take them, but other than that, it's just information.
Sure. Moved to receive, seconded by Trustee Higginson. Any questions? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. 8.3, Secretary Treasurer. Pardon? We're
just rocking through that.
Yes, yes. We will hit a speed bump at some point. 8.3,
Yes, okay.
Operating surplus and deficit policy. So just to provide a little bit of background, this is sort of a first kick at the can at a surplus and deficit policy for School District 68, which was requested by a financial health sort of audit done by the province, and all 60 school districts are expected to put together such policy, and each one is sort of left to figure out their own, feel their way along. So with further ado, I hand it over to you.
Well, as you can see, it's a very lengthy policy and procedure, so I am not going to go through it in great detail. Essentially, it's proposed that we separate the surplus policy into policy that provides objectives, what the purpose is, and then the administrative procedure into a procedure so that it can be operationalized by staff with greater ease. So that's why it's been separated into two documents. As Trustee Kimler just indicated, the purpose of us doing this is it was directed by the board, but it was also directed by the ministry, that we have this in place by June 30th of this year. What you'll probably see as the biggest difference between what we just in practice do right now and what has been formalized in the proposed policy and procedure is that we've suggested the board set aside a number of different reserves for various reasons that would be restricted from our accumulated operating surplus. And essentially that's just to ensure financial health and planning, and it formalizes it in a policy so that it's very clear, it's very transparent in terms of what we do with our accumulated surplus. We already in practice do that with some of our funds. We have a few reserves that we restrict funds to. And then again, there would always be a portion of the accumulated operating surplus that would be unrestricted just for any other unforeseen circumstances that the district could experience and would need to react to. The other thing this policy does that we don't currently have, again, formalized in the way of a procedure, is it allows for the board to react to forecasting a surplus or a deficit, and in some priority order, how we would react to that. So I can go into that a little bit more detail, but again, the policy has been provided as a first draft, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, so just before we start in on that, so I guess ultimately what I think would be a good idea with this, since we're receiving it sort of for the first time, would be to give trustees an opportunity to kind of look it over the next week or so, and if they do have questions or, you know, suggested changes or whatnot, write into our executive secretary, and we can compile that and have a more fulsome discussion on this after we're presented with perhaps another trustee Ray first.
You stole my thunder. That's exactly what I was going to say. I just move we receive this so we can have time to go over it and review it, and then we can come back at even the next business meeting and talk about it with all our partner groups again. But I mean, this is the first chance we've had to look at this, so maybe we could, I don't know, that's what I suggest.
It has to be seconded before.
Yeah.
I'll second it. I mean, not
I
gonna talk.
think Trustee Ray stole his own thunder and sort of spoke to it before.
Sorry.
It's okay. Trustee Brennan was next. Did you?
Well, just, it's postponing it till the next meeting, I think, is prudent, because we just received it, and it is kind of a detailed document, so I think it's wise to postpone.
Thank you. I agree in principle. My question would be, if we postpone it that long, like if we postpone it to May Business Committee meeting, does that give us enough, because this is being policy, it will have to go to 30-day public, correct?
Right, and we're not recommending that we do that obviously at this point because it is our first draft.
Yeah.
And if I can also suggest, as Trustee Kimler just indicated, that if the board is comfortable providing feedback through Karen before our next meeting, then we can also make some of those edits or incorporate some of those ideas and present another draft. I don't know if it would be significantly different or not, but we could work together in
Yeah.
terms of incorporating
Follow
some
up,
of those.
if you will, Mr. Chair. I guess my question is, the June 30th deadline, is that for having the policy fully, completely adopted? And if so, would it make sense to allow our partner groups to also send in some feedback now and consider some of that in the, just to make sure that we make that June 30th deadline?
There are a number of actions, policies, committees that need to be in place by June 30th. But I think that for the most part, the ministry is really looking that we are in progress. Okay. We are, actively seeking to put those things into place.
Yeah, just for point of clarity, the only deadline where actually anybody dies is if we don't pass the budget by June 30th.
True.
So these, this sort of financial health program's been undergone for the last couple of years. They wanted to implement it last year. It kind of got pushed back to this year. And I can almost rest assured that we're farther ahead than many of the school districts are. So I think we're in good shape as far as any deadlines are concerned. Superintendent Moore?
Yes, and just on that note, I think it's important that the board assures this policy is in place for around October, November of next year, when you have the surpluses and a better idea of what the operating budget is, and then you can implement some of those things. It really won't be started to be implemented until September, when we come back and we have a finalized 2017-18 budget.
Next on the list is Trustee Higginson.
So I like the suggestions that I'm hearing. My concern though is that it would be really great, this is a pretty important thing. When I add up the numbers that we're talking about, you know, if we did a total max, we're talking about almost $6 million. If we did a total min, we're talking about just over 2.2 million. It's a lot of money, and I think that people should have an opportunity to speak to it, and it should be done in a really transparent way, and us relying on emails concerns me. And I'm wondering if, I mean, we did get it yesterday. I'm wondering if there's not an opportunity for us maybe to have a special business meeting to address this. Everybody needs time to read it, is what I'm hearing, so people read it, and then we have these, you know, and still send in our email questions and stuff like that, because I think it's great for you guys to be able to come prepared to answer the questions that we have had, and then have this discussion with our partners, because it's really having their input and our staff's input as well into, you know, hearing, being able to answer the questions that our partners ask, if our staff wants to be able to respond to them. I just would prefer us to have it in a special meeting, or make sure that we have the time. The June 30th deadline is now considered a soft deadline. So I don't think we have to work under that time frame, but I would like us to be able to dedicate some time in a public setting, whether it's a special meeting or another business committee meeting, where we can actually all have good discussions about the questions that we have.
So I don't disagree with that at all. And in fact, I want to suggest to the partner groups that are out there that if you have any questions or input and feedback, please email Karen your input during this sort of period of time that we're having a first look at it as well. And I think the goal really of having sort of a quiescent period after having received it and then talking about it again, is to just allow everybody an opportunity to digest it and make their sort of initial comments. And after having looked over the first draft, you know, there's definitely going to be some changes. And I think we can take a stab at a second draft and have it a little bit more solidified before we really begin those fulsome discussions. And I honestly think we can do it at the next business committee meeting. I don't think we need to have another meeting for it, but if it turns out at the next business committee meeting that we have some stomach blocks, we can take all the time in the world we need to make this right, because like you suggest, it is a very important document. Trustee Routley?
I agree with Trustee Higginson. I really think, like, the board's most important job is policy. This being a policy, and staff saying, you know, you're a policy board, governance. I would like to see this start off a little bit more general. Definitely, I agree that we need a special meeting to discuss and some time to hear from our partner groups. So, yeah, no, like if somebody would second a motion to have a meeting about this policy, that would be my motion.
I think we're already in motion.
We're in a motion to receive right now.
Yeah, I think by the next business committee meeting, we'll have a better sense of how long it's going to take. And if we have it, we'll have it on the agenda for the next business committee meeting. And if we run into time problems, then we can certainly postpone to a further special meeting if necessary. But let's have a chance to look at it first and then have a discussion next month and see where we want to go from there.
Sure. Any other thoughts or comments? Trustee
I
Solomon?
was just going to say, I totally agree with that latest addition from Trustee Brennan, is that we do have some opportunity and some time, and we'll take the time we need, and we have to have a special meeting. And we'll go for it at that point, but let's take some time right now.
Sure. Trustee Robinson, do you have any thoughts?
On board.
Trustee Burzovich?
Yeah, just to sum up, I can agree with that. I do agree with Trustee Higginson. The most important thing is that we have as much transparency as possible, that we have as much dialogue as possible from as many people as possible, and because the budget is our primary way of implementing our strategy. You know, what our goals and our strategic plan is through the budget, and so how we manage this surplus and the surplus policy is probably one of the most important things we're going to do.
All those in favor of receipt?
Point of clarity. I just want to clarify with the motion that the next time we come together, we're not voting on this.
No, we're just discussing.
We're just going to be discussing.
Okay, that's a point of order.
Because Secretary Treasurer, that was the point.
Point of order?
Yes.
We can't declare one way or another what happens in another meeting.
Yeah.
Sure.
we're not missing.
Yeah, but if it'll set your mind at ease, I think the goal of everybody here is to have an opportunity to review it amongst ourselves first, bring it up at the next business meeting, and have a more fulsome discussion about it, including our partner groups. And if we require more time after that, we'll take as much time in the world as we need.
Oh, so you're saying we will be voting on it next session?
No, I'm not.
Okay, that's my clarification.
Okay, so all those in favor of the motion on table? Any objection? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. 8.4, Superintendent Blaine, we are having a review of budget strategies and requested presentations, as well as a Q&A by partner groups and trustees alike.
Right, thank you, and through the chair. While I'm preparing our introducing, I'm just wondering which group is going to go first. Do I have a volunteer? Do you guys know what? Bob, Mr. Essinger? Sure, if you want to set up, Bob. So I just want to suggest that these are some of the presentations that the board requested in some of the different areas around the budget that was presented, or around the budget strategies and initiatives that were presented. I want to reiterate in staff's opinion that the deeper we work in this and pull information out, it really is becoming a very, very good news budget. And we have a few little shifts and changes as we talk about all this tonight, and took some of the thoughts from the board already that you've given us to ensure that we're all feeling it in that direction. The one thing I wanted to note as we walk through this is the CEF funding really does continue to complicate things because of the fact that we're not exactly sure what our proposals into the CEF funding pieces will be. Particularly at the management level here, with additional funding for managers and et cetera because of the extra workload that's put on that. So the positive piece around that is I look at it as an insurance plan of the contingency that we've set aside, that the board has set aside to support us. And so we can talk about certain things that if the CEF funding does not come through, we can assure certain portions of the budget that will continue. One of those pieces is around some of the QP initiatives around facilities and et cetera that we're involved in maintaining the operational side, and that's a commitment through this process that we're making it. One of the other pieces is we had a discussion at the senior level. If the CEF funding remains as it is right now, we will be recommending that we pull out the Director of Instruction so that we can facilitate some of the other pieces that you're going to hear, some of the nuances that you're going to hear this year. So the direct staff of senior managers for next year will, when Superintendent Saywell takes over, will be a reduction of one position at the senior management position. There are many other little things that are coming up, not only tonight, but as we move through looking at the models and et cetera. But I think in order to move forward with this, I'm going to make one more note to try and give you some context here. As Mr. Essinger is speaking and others, we will be talking about some of the non-enrolling pieces, and I know one of the questions from the board was around SSTs and et cetera. Of the budget initiatives that we're talking about and that were presented last week and what are being represented tonight, any additions in counseling, in reading specialists, SSTs and those types of things are over and above what we already have in place, and we are meeting the guidelines of the non-enrolling ratios. So, for example, in the SST area that was brought up late by the NDTA in the last meeting, we have the ratios that we're working on our own, and the CEF funding will be generating a certain amount to maintain that, and then this is over and above. So when we talk about the reading specialists, I believe we have six that we're looking for. Six. Well, those are 6 FTE being added to the SST complement that's out there. So the ratio is 1-to-1 going down, more staff, less students, and the total number is going up as well. So as Mr. Essinger speaks to this, he'll address some of it, but you'll see it as it evolves along. So please feel free to ask questions as you move along. And the staff is here to answer some questions. We have some principals here tonight that will also be presenting because it fits the questions that the board had around some of the funding pieces. So if you're all right with that, then we can just move forward.
Yeah, sure. Just before we begin, just help me plan a little bit better for the meeting.
Yeah.
How many people did you have planned?
We have 3 different speaking groups. One is Mr. Essinger, one is administrators. So I'm missing the third. Do we have a third even?
It's probably Mr. Essinger and I combined our presentations.
Oh, thank you. So we have 2 different groups.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So through the chair, this is not one person's work, this is a department's work. So I want to make sure that it's clear that we all work together to put these strategies together to support our students in our district. And before I get into this, I want to acknowledge the work of our community school coordinators. They are my staff. I know firsthand the excellent work that they do. We have 2 of them here tonight. And if we were to remove those 5 positions or 4 positions or whatever, it would be a loss. However, before I even get into this, I want to say my recommendation that when we get to the end of this is that we, for 1 year, transition and keep the 5 positions for next school year, and then we'll work through a process. But I'll let you in on that. I just didn't want you thinking about that as I was talking about this, because I'm not going to get to it right away. So out of the hopper, in looking at focus schools, so the focus schools conversation and the community link conversation are very closely linked. So I'm going to start with the data that we were looking at. We looked at the NCFD Vulnerability Index. That is an index that the NCFD gives us each year to help us understand the vulnerability in our school communities. We looked at the EDI, the Early Development Instrument. We look at report card marks, and we look at Aboriginal student population in New Choice schools. The Focus School Initiative is based on a number of beliefs, but these 2 really sum it up. The first one is reading rates. We know that student success in reading is a predictor of life success. We also know that our focus in our focus schools, the main reason we're doing this work is we want to focus in the classroom. So all of the supports that we're going to add make a difference in the classroom. So those are the 2 beliefs that guide us. A summary as I begin is we're adding 0.45 FTE in elementary administration time. I have a grid coming up that's going to show you where that's going. We're proposing to add 7 child, youth, and family support workers. Proposing to add 3 elementary counselors and 4 literacy coordinators.
Trustee Rowley has a question. The 7 child and youth family support workers, what 7 schools are they being added to?
I'm going to show you that on the grid.
Okay.
So wave 1, these are the 4 focus schools that you know we have. We've been working with these schools for the last 3 or 4 years. In this budget, the additional supports are going to these new 8 schools. So I'll let you have a look at that. And when we looked at our data and looked at how our students were doing, there were 4 additional schools that we would have liked to have added and made 12 new focus schools. But we can't do it all. We don't have unlimited funds. But we did add additional supports to the next 4, which are those ones in the 3rd column called additional support. So those schools will be getting an additional amount of support. So this is pretty small, but I'll speak to it. So these are the 16 schools. It's the original 4, the new 8, and those last 4 that we're adding. The goal is to have all school principals at those schools be full-time. We are adding a half-time literacy coordinator to the 12 schools, and those bottom 4, that's the part they will not be getting. However, if you let your eyes go across the table, they are getting other supports. Adding the 3 elementary counselors means that none of our elementary counselors will have more than 2 schools. Translated again, each school will have half-time elementary counselor, each elementary school.
So Bob, just for clarification, does that mean all schools are having a slight increase in counseling time as well?
Yes, that's exactly what that means.
So not just the focus schools, but all schools?
So the initial 4 focus schools will remain with their 1.0, their full-time counselor. All other schools will have a half-time counselor. So that's a benefit to all schools, not just the ones on this list. Child, youth, and family support. This proposal outlines an increase in child and youth and family support worker hours. Right now they're all 30. The proposal is that we increase every child and youth care worker's hours to 33. The additional 7 child, youth, and family support workers puts a full-time coordinator in each of those 12 additional schools. So the 4 original focus schools have a full-time child and youth care worker. The 8 new focus schools get a full-time child and youth care worker. And those 4 additional that get other support, that is the other support they're getting. They're getting a full-time child and youth care worker. The remainder of the schools in our elementary schools, they will have half-time, which is what they have now. You'll notice the next column addresses vice principal. So the check marks show you where we will be adding vice principal. That is an addition because those schools have a high vulnerable student population. It is imperative that we increase the admin time in their schools. In the other column, I wanted to highlight where the community school coordinators currently are. Now, please also know that I'm not discussing secondary schools here, but John Barsby and NDSS remain with their community school coordinator focus. Because Community Link provides funding for a number of supports to schools, there are 2 schools in our district that have a school meals person, a school meals assistant. We will remain with those 2 positions for next school year as we work with schools in ways that we could maybe look at a different way of providing food for students. But for next year, they're going to remain. So the summary of changes in Community Link. My proposal to you is that we take the 4 out of the 5 community school coordinators out of the Link budget and find additional funding for them to keep them. We need the funding in Link to increase the child, youth, and family support workers. So my request of my boss is that we find funding in another place for that, and I believe he's going to speak to that. During the year next year, the 5 community school coordinators and I will work on creating portfolios for them. One of them will be charged with working directly with the Nanaimo Ladysmith Schools Foundation in grant writing. And the grants, hopefully, that we're able to locate will increase funding for all of our schools, not just the ones in the inner city. And whether that money be for food or be for supplies, that's to be determined. But it will have a very good contact to work with Crystal Dennison at the Schools Foundation. Other portfolios will be NS3, which is the science program that we have running out of, I was going to say Departure Bay, but it's Island Connected now. Yeah. And other connections with the John Howard Society for Restorative Justice. And there are many others that we will be working on next year as we walk through that. We're going to look at an internal review and a revisioning of what community schools are in 2018. We need to look at that so that when we get to this time of the year, next school year, we can address whether we're going to move forward with it as it is or change it. And whatever that change is, we will discuss then. Like I said, we're going to maintain the school meals assistance. There's this one position in our school district out of the 1,800 positions called a street worker. and we're going to maintain that position. It's a position at John Barsby Secondary. It was created way back when Community Link first came in, and the job description is on our website, and it's quite unique, but it's to support our most vulnerable students. We're going to ensure that EA time at our Link-funded schools this school year, that EA time that they purchased with Link funding will remain in those schools for next school year. So that will happen. We're going to create a fund for vulnerable students that any principal in the district can apply to for supports for vulnerable students. Again, not just our inner city schools, but any principal, and we will articulate what that criteria is. But it could be for food, it could be for eyeglasses, it could be for bus tickets, it could be for rentals for band instruments. Those are typically the things that we fund for vulnerable students who don't have the funding. We're going to add 7 child, youth, and family support workers. We're going to increase all of their hours from 30 to 33. And then, if this works, it would be quite a coup that we create a mental health and addictions coordinator as an excluded person. This is something that I don't know any district has. It would be unique in that it would be a direct connection of our school district with RCMP, Child and Youth Mental Health, emergency at the hospital, Discovery Youth and Family Addictions. I think I'm missing one. That person will be able to work with our schools on our most intensive cases. Right now, when we have a case that is in that 1%, we still need to go through intake when we call child and youth mental health. We still need to go through intake, or sometimes we don't even know that a student has been taken up to emergency in the evening or on the weekend. This person will be in the know. This person will have direct contacts in those places. This person would also be clinical, so that they could do the clinical case conferencing with our staff. Our child and youth care workers and our counselors, K-12, have been asking me for years to get them someone to help case conference and deal with these critical cases that they experience in our schools every day. I've tried different ways to do that. They've not worked out. This would be a person who could do that work and remain objective in their case conferencing with our staff. Our staff need this, it's for their mental health, but it's also, again, someone who has community experience who can do this work. I think it's quite exciting if we do this, and so I'm hopeful that we can pull that off. And that's it.
Do we have any questions or comments for Mr. Bob Essinger? Trustee Rowley, first on the list.
No, I think it's great. Like, I'm looking at the, not making the cuts, and just wondering, like, what was the your main motivation for kind of like not making those cuts to the positions?
Through the chair, it came from listening. We heard loud and clear at last meeting last week that it seemed rushed. We needed a transition. QB let us know that that's typically what we do when we move from 5 positions to no positions. So, and then as trustees charged us, we went away after the meeting last Wednesday, had discussions about how we could move forward, and we came up with this.
Next, Trustee Higginson.
I'm happy to see at least the transition year. It's interesting in all the years we've been doing this. I don't think I've had as much input from the community on a position being cut as I got feedback on our community schools coordinators, which shows how important they are to the community and engaging students in the school. I think that's a really important thing that they do. They keep the kids at the school that need to be there. And so I'm glad to see this, but you did mention that there's going to be a trade-off possibly coming, and I'm curious to know what that is and whether we should, is it coming, is this part of another presentation?
No,
Or-
I was gonna speak to it
Okay.
as soon as my name comes up.
You're injected.
So that's my question is, what's the trade-off that
What's
we
the
are?
trade-off? So, we discussed this and it was the interesting piece with the CYWs in the sense of adding the hours, and we're uncertain of how they're going to roll out in our schools and the support that they give. So we need a year to look at that. So what we're suggesting is within the budget strategies, one FTE remains in Community Link, which is the grant writer proposal as we develop that role. There'll be some role changes for our community schools coordinators, and they're well aware of that. We met with them yesterday, Mr. Essinger and the group, to discuss how that might look and et cetera, and those types of things, and got their input. That was a big piece, as Mr. Essinger said, about listening. So we're suggesting that for 1 year, we go to contingency to maintain the other 4 positions as they are, and we walk through the year and create an analysis during the year as to how we're doing in both areas, the focus school model and how that is working itself through with the community schools coordinators. And if the board then chooses to maintain those positions, then they would move it back into the budget, or at that point in time, the board and staff at the time, through whatever recommendations are made and the analysis that was made, can make a different decision. So it'd be a one-time only in the contingency, because as we've recognized, contingency is made up for just 1 year only type pieces. And then at the end of the year, it gives us everyone an opportunity to take a breath, have a look at where we're at, and what the next steps are. So for this year only, there would be about a $250,000 piece that we would be accessing our contingency for, to ensure that the coordinators would be working.
Trustee Solomon?
Well, I just want to thank you, Bob, for this, and I think that it's a pretty comprehensive outlook in terms of how we're going to deal with these positions and the focus schools, and you appreciate some of the work that all the work that the community support work people do. And I think there was a lot of concern about losing some of the programming that these people have provided, and because it's a huge part of the support network that's there. So again, I think it's social anxiety is a big issue. We hear about it all the time. So the mental health equation is definite, and you're looking at that, and so that's really a great step. I did want to ask you though. You said 7 new positions for the child and youth care workers, but then you had 8 schools. So how does that work?
Okay, through the chair. What you're not seeing is the contribution from Aboriginal education.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so that gives us the number that we need. And I invite Laura, I meant to turn to you at various points in the conversation and give you an opportunity to chime in. Anything you wanted to add around contribution from Aboriginal education?
Well, just another little piece that through AbEd, there will be, to the 4 original focus schools, an additional 0.2 FTE admin time to all 4 schools, regardless of their population and what kind of FTE it drives, and that can be shared between the P and the VP or whatever, to ensure, just to push the notion of reconciliation in another way. So there's another contribution in addition to CYC and all the other sort of standard AbEd supports. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Trustee Brennan?
Thank you. I'm
Oh,
pleased.
sorry.
Yeah.
Rob's here on the list now.
Okay. Well, I'll always defer to it.
Thank you. It's not really a question, but I want to do, hopefully, I thank the board in advance of the work that has been done behind the scenes to look at keeping the community school coordinators on through the year, next year if it does go the way it is, and speak that they do a job that had a lot of community support. I've been talked to a lot of people, as same as Trustee Higginson mentioned, that support their work that they're doing. And I would be one that would feel like, hopefully, through the amended budget, and as the new government gets their feet in line, that they will support funding, and the funding will remain to keep those projects open, rather than saying, will it come out of contingency? I hope there will be additional funding that we can support that going forward. I think they'll prove themselves over the year that the value that they bring into the school district per student is well worth the dollars that are put out. So thank you in advance.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased that we're keeping the coordinators on. They seem to, they operate in a kind of netherworld, because they're on their own mostly, and they don't blow their own horns. The good they do is mostly focused on the children and the families in the district. And I recall we did have one evaluation done of the program about a decade ago, and it was not a good piece of work, and it didn't tell us very much, and it was not useful for any further development. So I hope during the next year we can do some kind of collaborative inquiry or evaluation. First of all, we have to know, the board has to know what they have in a community school. What are the objectives, and are they meeting the objectives? You know, what do we see as a community school? What do we see as the coordinators function within the community, and tap into some of the people that receive the services to find out how much they value the services. So that at the end of the year, we'll come back with some information upon which we can base a further decision. But it does give them a year to kind of breathe and demonstrate how much work they do for the kids in our district. I know one superintendent was not happy with them because he said, well, what are they doing towards education? Well, education is not always done within the confines of a classroom. It often happens in other venues, you know, during summer programs, for example. And I've seen the good work that they do, and the links they have with our neighborhood associations is another valuable connection that they serve. So I look forward to this year being one of learning more about what they do, and them knowing more about what we want them to be doing. So the onus is on us as well. What is a community school? You know, what do we want them to be doing in the community, and are they succeeding? The second part is the mental health coordinator. I think that's an excellent position. I know when I worked in the mental health field, there were a lot of young people who were very troubled, had not completed school, suffered things like first break psychosis and other kinds of mental health issues, and there was this serious vacuum between adulthood and childhood for those young people. And once they got into the clutches of the mental health system, it was very difficult for them, because they tend to be over-medicated and underserved. So I think this position, the person who fills this position will have quite a challenge. And we do have a ministry of mental health and addictions. And that will provide that person with opportunities, perhaps for funding, but also for some liaison to make sure that young people get better services. There is that gap. You know, if you're an adult, you get the full service. If you're a child, you don't. In the criminal justice system, after the age of 12, you'll get full service, all right. Before then, you don't. So I'm hopeful that we can provide some level of service that will ensure that fewer of our young people end up in the psychiatric units or hospitals and can continue their education. So, thank you.
Trustee Burzbich?
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Esslinger, thank you. I lost a fair bit of sleep last Wednesday night over this particular news. Seriously, I am a huge believer in community schools. I worked for a year at George Avenue School as a sort of link between the main school and the community schools. So I do know what they can do and what the value they bring. So I guess my thought, or I don't know if this is a question or a statement or what it is. I know that in the past there has been a presentation in the beginning of the year from the coordinators or from yourself of the coordinators' yearly reports of where they've been working, what funds they brought in. I would like to see that come back next year in the fall if that's possible. Because I think there are people around this table who don't know the extent of what the community schools bring to our district. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, over the past week, I've been reviewing the community school policy, which is actually under board governance, by the way. And one of the things that it says in the policy that we're not doing is we no longer have an advisory council or committee. And you can look at that. I don't want to, you don't have to answer this right now, it's just something for you to think about, because opportunity for listening. To do a re-envisioning and a re-evaluation of community schools only amongst yourselves and not getting not having a vehicle for also some input from people who are passionate about community schools is not going to be good. Obviously there's work that all of you have to do on your own, that's the operational day-to-day pieces of the functions. But if you could make a vehicle, make a way to have opportunities for input from those of us who believe in community schools, and to let you know what we value about the programs, I think that you would be wise to do that. So that's just a piece of advice for now.
Trustee Robinson.
Yes, I've been involved in one way or another with community schools for 18 or 19 years. I sat on their provincial body, HBC, for 3 years. And even with all of that, I'm not aware of 60% of what community school coordinators do. They do so much in so many different ways, in almost hidden ways. And as somebody said, they don't brag or blow their own horns. One of the things I've observed over my 18 or 19 years is senior management and trustees have not been aware of what these people do, and I think the real plus out of this is we're now going to focus on that position. We're going to study what it is these people do and how we can grow what they're doing in whatever way possible with full support of them and full involvement of our staff. So I think it's a very positive thing.
So it's interesting because there's not a lot to complain about when you have a budget that adds $3 million of supports to your schools, right? But I have to tell you, I, like Trustee Berzovich, lost some sleep over this. And I think it's partly because even though I defer to the fact that you're a doctor of education and I'm just a lowly geophysicist, I live in a community that's serviced by a community schools coordinator. And so I know within our own community that person is actually the face of the school for that community. So when we talk about community link funding, I mean, we're talking about a position that's the epitome of what community link funding, the community link is. And I had a difficult time and I wrestled with this, and partly is because I hadn't heard what the plan was. And so I'm very relieved to see that we're going to keep these positions and these people and that they're going to continue and the schools will benefit from them. And you know, and it's funny sitting on this side of the table and not having a background in education. You know, we have focus schools, and then I kind of wonder, well, are all of the other schools that we have unfocused? You know, and we have community schools. Well, does that mean the other schools that we have aren't part of a community? So I wrestle with some of the terminology, and one of the bits that I wrestle with is the fact that I don't know what school coordinators do, and I don't know what child, youth, and healthcare or child, youth, whatever workers, thank you, they do. And so I guess I would caution you, because when I first heard about it, I thought to myself, gee, in a really good news budget, I hear this, and I'm thinking this is a position we need more of, not less of, because it's working. And so I guess over the next year, I think my recommendation, and it's too bad that the Education Committee Chair isn't here, because my recommendation would be that we hear more about these positions during the Education Committee meeting and learn about them, because I'm not opposed to change as long as these job functions are covered. And they're not done off the side of somebody's desk, which is what it sort of sounded like to me what the original plan was. So I'm very encouraged to hear that we're going to keep the positions, and I look forward to learning more about what they do, because they are an integral part of our community. Trustee Higginson?
Thanks. I'll try to be quick. Thank you. I appreciate that this is, I support the use of contingency for this. I think it's exactly why we have it. It's a one-year use of, and we also know that We tend to have a surplus at the end of the years because we are very conservative in the way we budget. And the CEF set aside, who knows what's going to happen with that. So I think this is a good use of our contingency, our staffing contingency. I think, when it comes to the Community Link money, we are in a funding formula review. So don't get too attached to Community Link money. But I don't say that because it's going to disappear. I just think it's going to come in a different form. In fact, I know it's not going to disappear. I just think it's going to come in a different form. These positions, as we've heard, are really important. And when we look at them, my encouragement as well would be to look closely at what the positions are doing and connect them to student achievement. And by student achievement, I don't just mean grades. I think it would actually behoove the board to come up with our own definition of student achievement and what we mean by that. But, connect them to student achievement and our strategic plan. And when you're doing the review, if there's gaps between what we're offering and where we want to go, then we really want to see those gaps filled. Kids learn best when they're engaged in school. And that is what in my community, the community schools coordinator is out there. They do these amazing, grants for after school and before school programs, and they make sure that those kids who need to be there are there first and foremost and fill those along with a lot of other things that they do. But they keep kids engaged, and I think that's really important. And thirdly, I'm going to propose a motion that the business committee recommend that the Board of Education write a letter to the Minister of Mental Health to provide the district with funding for the new mental health coordinator position as a pilot model for possible expansion to other districts.
I will second that.
It just seems like a no-brainer to me that we should be letting people know we're doing this and try and shake every tree we can to get money for it. So
we have a motion on the table. Anybody else like to speak to it? Anybody speak to it in the negative sense of non-support?
Did you get a second?
Yeah, we got you as the second. So, all of those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And we'll finish up with Trustee Rowley.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that this is going to be held on to these positions. I was really concerned the CYC workers. It's not in their wheelhouse. They're focusing on the children, and they have counseling expertise. They keep kids in the school, but they don't connect with the community. Their job isn't community outreach, so to speak. And we all know, like the research says, people in poverty, they don't trust police, they don't trust the education system, they don't trust institutions, right? And so I would really caution any trustees that are here next year to understand, the police department has outreach, has advocates out there, and that's their job. To add 3 hours to a CYC worker to try to do that seems to me far-reaching, is one word I'd have for it. And I like what Trustee Brennan said, like, show us the stats, that's great. I think statistics are good because they show us what the jobs, what the job entails, but also what outreach is being done, right? But if it's broke, if it's not broke, don't fix it. The other question is why remove it in the first place? Community schools have been, Superintendent Blaine has been saying that, these focus schools show improvements in graduation rates. So, I would even say next year, we should be really cautious, if it's, even though we're dipping into contingency, I would like to see, programs like this being thought of long-term, as far as like prevention, as far as community support. So, I just take us to that next level. Like, I love the mental health position, and that we're doing that. That's amazing. Like, amazing steps in the right direction. And Bob, good work. Really good work.
Yes. Thank you very much for your presentation and also your good work. And you may.
So, I'm glad it came up. I want trustees to know that we didn't land in the removal of, or the proposed removal of the positions lightly. It was a lot of discussion. What we were looking at with a limited amount of funding, we were looking at how can we take what is outside the school day and put it inside the school day. And not all, but a lot of the work of community schools happens outside the school day. So that was our rationale, focusing the system back on our core business. If we can do that in another way and buy us some time to explore next year, I'm very pleased with that. But I just want you to know that it wasn't an easy decision to even propose that in the first place. And I explained that to the coordinators. They knew it wasn't a value judgment against the work that they were doing. It was a way to provide support inside.
Well, you have a year to do better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. So, moving along, I'll be calling upon Mr. Saywell, I believe. And he has some guests, and I shouldn't say they're guests. They are the managers out there of our schools, and they are direct connects and the leaders to what we do out there, supporting teachers, supporting all of our staff and the students. So I think they're going to help Mr. Saywell present, and again, there'll be a few interjections and et cetera as we move along, and I think they would probably welcome questions as you move along. So as they're getting ready there, you're all set? Perfect.
Good evening. As you're aware, there are significant increases to admin time in this budget, and we feel it's prudent to explain that to you. Why? What you also know is that all of our administrators work 100% of the time. There's nobody who's part-time. But what they are is part-time in the classroom. So when we ask that you increase their admin time, what we're actually doing is putting teaching time into the classroom. So we wanted to tell you a little bit about the expanding and evolving role of our principals and vice principals, and who better to do that than principals and vice principals. So I'll ask Mr. Steele to come up. Mr. Steele is the president of the Nanaimo School Administrators Association. With him this evening, John Cunyon and Kevin Brandt, who are co-chairs of the Professional Learning Committee for EMSA. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys, and you're going to talk about why we're doing this and the evolution of your role and what we're doing even this year about that with new growth plans, but as well we're going to talk about effect size and what the research says about their changing role.
Thank you. Nathan, and good day to all of you. I'm Jeff Steele, Kevin Brand, and John Kenyon here. It's a pleasure to be here this evening to talk to you a little bit about the evolving roles of principals in our EMSA capacity. That's not a picture of the three of us. A little confusion there. That's the admin team there. Yeah, Ricky, and Stacey, and myself. I wanted to draw your attention. Well, first of all, EMSA's got a brand new logo. So we got rid of the Bastion-centric logo and then reconnect that to reconciliation. We're proud to have that. I wanted to point out our association has 5 or 6 clear purposes. The first purpose is probably our, the one that we're most passionate about, is to foster the educational leadership as a means of promoting and advancing education at all levels. And clearly that impacts students. When I first got into administration, it was clear that leadership was the focus, and one of the first meetings I went to, we were all given this leadership on the line book, so to me it's a little symbolic. You can see a pretty stark quote from within it, and to lead is to live dangerously, because when leadership counts, when you lead people through difficult change, you challenge what people hold dear, their daily habits, tools, loyalties, and ways of thinking, with nothing more to offer perhaps than a possibility, and we deal in possibilities every day. And I remember getting that book, and when I left the room, I thought, what have I done? Right? But I think it's very important that we embrace our leadership roles. We take it very seriously. This slide is just a little compilation of some of the things that we are actively involved in leading within the district, and we lead within our school systems with our teams, with our teachers and support staff, and large groups of people in some schools and smaller in other schools. You can see that 2018 loading symbol. This is all the stuff that's been coming down from the government with basically historic change that's happening. The administrators are in this, and we're leading this along with our stakeholders that we've mentioned here. We've got new curriculum. We're reporting in different ways. Our teachers are reporting in ways in which they were never reported on as students. They're actively engaged in these things, and we have to have this language. This slide indicates all the new learning that we've had to do. You notice there's a little platform hidden under there, Fresh Grade, where we're looking at areas in which we can better communicate with the parents about student improvement. So I think we're all aware that this is happening, and a lot has come on to administrators over the past few years as it's come on to teachers and support staff. Got a little, that's Snooze, is it? Skinner. Principal Skinner. Principal Skinner. He's kind of got his hand on his heart there. How do we influence student success? And part of it is leading every day. This is the stuff this is just an example of things that we do in our leadership capacity. This is the stuff that we're very passionate about. Things like school goals, mission, vision, values for schools, PLC leadership, our connection to PAC in communicating with our parents is very important. Within schools, secondary schools in particular, we have formalized teacher learning leaders. We are leading the learning leaders. We're crafting the agendas. We're helping guide the conversation to have the biggest impact on students within our schools. I think that's very important. Facilitating, the professional learning opportunities, helping organize sometimes events where we bring staff together and move to another school or another area to learn, and staff meetings. All those things are embedded leadership moments for us, and we craft that time out of the management portion that we have to do. So we're very proud to be doing that. We can serve a critical role in the whole process. And this may be new information, that all of the administrators within the school district, we have a professional growth plan. So we've had to develop these this year. Some of our administrators have them prior, but we've got a commitment to all have a professional growth plan that's based on the BC PBPA growth plan model. There's an 8-stage process, so we've got these things, and they're very leadership focused. So within it, there are 4 key domains, and you'll notice there's moral stewardship, instructional leadership, relational leadership, and organizational leadership. Leadership is obviously critical, and underneath each of them, we self-assess. We have to look at ourselves very reflectively. And you'll notice under instructional leadership, when you open it up, there's the standards, the BC PBPA standards, so British Columbia Principal Vice Principal Association standards. So supervision for learning, professional relationships, clarifying purpose, structures and support, learner-focused dialogue, curriculum instruction and assessment. Those are all things that we actively lead. And we have to be thoughtful about this, and it's very unifying for us all to have this language that we work through. So my last piece here before I hand it off, this is a little snapshot out of my own professional growth plan. And we all have basically a number of goals, but 2 that we focus on. So this is one for myself, to foster the development of educational leaders at Nanaimo District Secondary School to improve student success. So that's a critical thing. I've mentioned the manager leader piece there. We can't just focus on the leading. I think you guys are aware. We have to manage the building. We have to get chairs for assemblies. We have to, organize fire drills. We have to deal with student interventions and all those other things. But leadership is a critical role for us, and that's, I think, where we really hang our hat. We're really proud of that.
Thank you. And I appreciate you inviting me here to speak today on International Bring Your Children to a Board Meeting Day. It's a life-changing event for them, and thank you for sharing that with me. I wanted to speak a little bit about what some of the research is telling us, and I imagine Mr. Saywell has spoken a little bit about Hattie. This is a name we're all familiar with at this point, Hattie's meta-analysis of educational research. and effect sizes. And what his research is telling us about instructional leadership is its greatest effects are on student outcomes when promoting and participating in teacher learning and development. So that doesn't sound like a managerial role, that's an educational leader role. And that's what having extra time in your day enables you to do. Getting out of that management role, being able to participate in teacher development, and being one of the lead learners in your building. Another aspect of this with a large effect size is the planning, coordination, evaluation of teaching in the curriculum. A lot of us within the NSERC ranks have been participating in the Supervision for Learning course through the BCPDPA. It's called Leading a Culture of Learning. The idea being that we're involved in the classroom, providing formative feedback to teachers on instruction, getting involved in understanding what learning is taking place in the classroom in the day-to-day. And again, that's difficult to get to when you're also trying to provide a safe, caring, inclusive, and orderly school environment. But this is nonetheless a very important task. One of the largest effect sizes comes by way of collective teacher efficacy. And Dr. Diane Charles, who's one of the principals in the district, was to speak to our principal and vice principal group yesterday about this, and unfortunately we didn't have enough time to go through her presentation. So I phoned her up today and said, Diane, I'm allowed to call her Diane, I don't have to call her Dr. Charles. How could you sum up the effects of leadership in terms of collective teacher efficacy? And she said, well, that's a bit tough to do because I just did my whole PhD on it. But she tried really hard. And really what it comes down to is the idea of leading that process of coming up with goal consensus. Everybody's working towards the same outcomes. That collaborative effort towards influencing student outcomes. The mission, vision, values piece that Jeff was talking about. The process of coming up with that is very, very challenging, but it can't end at the end of the development phase. Mission, vision, and values has to be more than just what's printed on a piece of paper and tacked up on your wall. It has to be lived and breathed by everybody in that building, otherwise we become inefficient, we're ineffective in our practice. So these are some of the aspects that I see us leading today.
Thanks, and I realize that I really dropped the ball here. Had I known it was bringing your children to the board meeting day, I would have had my 3 here as well. But,
I'll send a calendar invite.
Yeah, fortunately, through Dale's work, as they do every board meeting, they're glued to the TV at home. So I'll just give a little wave to my children, and I know they'll be very proud of me. So, my role here is to just, I guess, speak to the work on the ground. I do work at Bayview, and as one of the 4 focus schools that are currently in existence, I just want to speak to the value of being a full-time administrator in that building, and then just speak to the challenges of not being full-time that some of my colleagues are facing right now, and through the budget we're looking to improve that. And the slide that I'm going to have up there for all 3 of my points is that learner at the center, and I know that you're committed to that, and I'm grateful for that. That's what we're all committed to as well, keeping that child in the room as all decisions are made, and just really bringing it down to that core unit, and it's what we share with all of our stakeholder groups as well, as we're here for the kids. The first point I'll make is that our focus schools do have a higher number of vulnerable children and families that we serve. And what that means is that the situations, the incidents, the challenges are complex. That when we talk about reading rates, we know that it's not just the reading rate that we focus on. We focus on the whole child, and we provide an environment where that child can learn. And that's at its essence, it's in the classrooms. But supporting that child and supporting that classroom teacher and supporting that EA perhaps is a team of people. And that team of people requires some coordination and requires some time. And so really at that level, if we're going to be serious about this idea of inclusion, if we're going to be serious about this idea of supporting all children and families, we need some time to do it. We need to be resourcing that, and we really need to be coming at these situations with the full weight they deserve. And we've seen that happen at Bayview, and we've seen that happen in the focus schools because we have some more time and we have some additional supports in order to do that. So other children also deserve that. Okay. The second point that I'll make is when we become principals or vice principals, we put on that hat. It becomes extremely clear to us that we're no longer viewed by the community, by our supervisors, as teachers. We're viewed as principals and vice principals. In our hearts, we are all teachers, as is everybody in the system. However, to put a principal in a classroom is still to have a principal in front of those children. And what the children deserve is to have a teacher in front of them. And just as a small example of that, when something happens and a principal is needed, that hat is still on and that principal is pulled out and then somebody is placed in front of those children because the team works together on that. But what those children deserve is a teacher in front of them that's not being pulled out because their phone's ringing, because somebody needs an answer to something. They need to have a consistent learning environment that's going to be fully able to support them throughout in a continuous way. The third piece that I'll add is just that idea of what our role is. It's the hub of many different dimensions of what goes on inside a school. And to be trying to do any of that off of the side of your desk is very, very challenging. Again, another small example, when we're working with community supports, like for example, the ministry, their phones go off at 4 p.m. I can't continue that work of connecting with people past into the overtime when I'm doing all my paperwork. It needs to be done during the hours that those conversations can happen. And the only way to do that is to give it the time that it deserves. The only way to be connected with the people in our building, and we can't be under any illusion that our work is not anything but people work. We need to be able to be with our people, build those relationships, connect the supports that the children and the staff need when they need it, and really provide that. And I'm really honored, grateful that the board has recognize that. I'm grateful to all our colleagues who have been doing this work in very challenging circumstances, and I know that when that was brought to us, it brought an awful lot of relief, not for our sake, but for the sake of the kids and the families that we serve. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to all three of you. And I noticed your kids waving back when Kevin was telling his kids to wave, so good job. Does anybody have any questions, or Trustee Higginson?
I'll try to frame these as questions, but this trustee personally is very supportive of this proposal in our budget. You know, as you just talked about, when our school leaders are split in many different directions, you do a bunch of things poorly as opposed to being able to do one thing well, which is lead. And I know you talked about the difference between managers and leaders, but you're leading the building in every aspect of it. And I think I watch in awe at the number of balls you guys constantly have in the air, and so very rarely do you ever drop one. And when you do, it's often because you were running to teach, or you know, so I think this is a decision that I wholeheartedly support. I'm fortunate enough in my provincial position to sit on a provincial group that's all about supporting the leaders in the province. It used to be called the Leadership Development Working Group, and then it got changed to the Leadership Working Group because we don't need to develop the leaders. We need to find ways to support the leaders we have to do the good work you're doing. So, and this is such an intense time in education with the learning transformation that's happening as well, that I think it's really important that our school-based leaders have the time to focus on leading the schools, including the managing part of it. And I think that will actually have really, really positive benefits on student achievement. So I thank you for the work you do, for being here tonight to present this to us, and I fully support this recommendation in the budget.
Trustee Burzbich?
Thank you. Well said, Trustee Higginson. And I also I share all those thoughts, and I want to say thank you. What you said just now sort of crystallized for me how to explain this to people, why I think this is important. what you said about being in a classroom, but half of you is sort of thinking about what could be going on, you know, that's really important. And I think about some of the vulnerable kids that I know, that they need their teacher to be able to be fully engaged and present, and not worrying about if they're going to get a phone call or if there's a fight breaking, you know, and being late coming back to class because of the fight broke out outside in the playground, you know, because that after lunch period I know can be sometimes particularly interesting. Yeah. So no, I thank you, because I think I will use that example to help me explain to people why this is a good use of admin money for sure, is to have principals available to be full-time principals. Yeah.
Trustee Brown?
Back in a previous life, when I was the point person for Dover, I popped in on the principal at Dover, and I was actually quite surprised. She was multitasking with the vice principal. The police were being called. The vice principal was running around. There was another relationship blow up, and I was seeing all this in action, and I was just in awe. I was just kind of in, you know, I was waiting to meet with the principal, going, one thing you guys missed on your presentation is you know, part-time security police liaison. Like you guys are just putting out fires, and I know that the work you do allows the teachers to have a safe environment, allows the schools to be safe. So awesome. Like when I saw that added to the budget, I saw actually help to the teachers and help to the staff trickle down, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Superintendent White? Thank you, and thanks guys again. It's always great to listen. I just want to speak to the initiative itself, and it's kind of two in one when we talk about secondary and elementary, but both of them all of the same issues and context there. So this is where we around ACE and senior managers really took a look at the Focus School initiative increases the 12 other schools and up to full-time. And there were 4 or 5 schools in between that gap of schools in elementary that already have full-time and the Focus Schools. And so this was where we thought was best to spend our instructional leadership piece around the Director of Instruction. And so we are also saying that we can implement full-time principalships in elementary, and also support in these budget initiatives that we're talking about, also support full-time secondary principals and vice principals. And we think that's the step in the right direction to support teachers, to support and the students out there, vulnerable students. We think it'll add to our ability to work with engaging students and keeping some students in school, and moving us forward in the leadership manner that is required of a very, very complex society in today's world. So it's all encompassing in operating as we speak, and yeah, it'll be all the principals elementary, all principals and vice principals of secondary.
So I've got Trustee Brzovic with the follow-up question, but as she's already spoken, I'm wondering if there's anything from this side of the table in terms of comments or questions.
All your thoughts, but no.
Trustee Brzovic?
Just on a due diligence level, I mean, I know the answer, I'm confident the answer will be yes, but are we confident that in having all those principals become full-time administrators, that we're going to have the teaching the capacity within our teaching ranks to fill up those FTE? How much FTE are we looking at, do you think?
We're very comfortable with it. It's not that as significant as you may think it is.
Okay.
The majority of principals are in and around 0.8. And so we're really topping up and doing some different things around that. So
Okay.
we should be fine. And the whole piece around looking for and recruiting, bringing teachers in is going to be an ongoing process for a few years until we get caught up. So I you know, like, we wouldn't recommend it if we didn't think.
Yeah, I know, but I just had to put it out there.
No, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Want to thank you three guys for coming. Three of our best, no doubt. So, thank you.
So in beginning to wrap this up, a couple of the last quotes or comments that were left with us last week. First off would be, there was a question about mentorship, I know, from a trustee. I just wanted to encapsulate a little bit of why it's not in this year's budget. We are in the process of working around with the NDTA, around contractually around that, what that looks like. We also are unsure of the CEF funding, and mentorship is also a request in that piece as well. And I just want to make comment also that this board 3 years ago began a PLC piece around professional learning groups in our schools, and there's time there that is fully supported by board. You know, that it is student learning time. Some of the time that was put in there was the implementation day to support it. Other time, another portion of the time was staff meeting time there. And I suggest that as we tweak this, that's all ways that we do support teachers. And so I think for us to suggest that we could put a cost value on next steps on mentorship is probably premature, because we need time to be able to work with the NDTA through Nutsmut-Tulaluk, gather more information, see where the ministry is going a little bit with that, and then also the CEF funding. So we didn't directly respond to that in this budget, but that doesn't mean that as the year goes along and some of these discussions are occurring, that won't happen. The last piece that I wanted to say is that was that management discussed, and as we put this together, particularly this week, and started to bring our staffing issues in play, we are beginning within our district to prepare for staffing, which is of large magnitude. And we, what came to me in the ACE meeting where all the departments are talking about it is when we started to align all the dates and calendars and the necessities for a budget such as this, representing approximately 45 FTE new to the system and having the proper opportunities, it began to get very, very tight. So what Secretary Treasurer McVeigh is going to present to you is a possibility that if this board is feeling comfortable with what we're doing and the direction we're going, for this board to have the discussion tonight that will give us a little bit of direction as to next steps. As I said, this is the beginning of a good news budget, or this is, I believe, a good news budget as we walk through it. It gives the recommendation that we're going to be presented gives us some flexibility to move forward as a staff and to prepare for the next year as well. And but I'm going to say that if there are other things that the board wants to bring forward, then please bring it forward, and we will prepare for you and get it done as quickly as we can. And we do appreciate the fact that the board is moving at light speed compared to where we were in the past. Deficit budgets are a lot harder to deal with sometimes than as far as the board is concerned, but when you look at that as compared to this budget here. So Secretary Treasurer McVeigh, if the board is ready and there's no other questions, we would present to you a thought about the next steps for us.
So the board's not quite ready yet.
Okay.
Trustee Brennan's next.
Yes. The previous board was very excited about the professional learning communities in the schools and about what they could accomplish over time with effort. And it would be interesting to hear a report on accomplishments from some example schools on how they've been doing with their professional learning community. And I would refer that to the Education Committee Chair. or vice chair, to perhaps bring it to the next school year and inform the board, or education committee, sorry.
Thank you, Trustee Brennan, and I believe that it would be prudent for the board to request that, to move forward into this the new era as we talk about in leadership and learning.
Thank you, Chair.
Trustee Higginson?
So I appreciate the comments from the superintendent on why we're not putting a mentorship program into the budget. I do have two concerns. The first is, like, in no point in time are we going to have more fresh new teachers than now. And if there is any time for us to be proactive on this, especially for our new teachers, it is now. So I just say that in response. Also, I know there's not much we can do because we do have to pick and choose, and I understand that. My other concern is with the mention of PLC time. It feels to me like we just keep kind of eroding away at the purposes of PLC time. And my understanding when it started was that it was supposed to be there to support the RTI model. And that's why it was put in place. And then we use it also to support the learning transformation and the curriculum implementation and staff time or staff meeting time and all these types of things. And so at some point then, what happens to the initial use of it, which was supposed to be to support the RTI model? Do we stop using RTI because we're not using PLC time? Because PLC time is very, very, very key to the success of an RTI model. So I caution us to continue eroding away and putting things into that PLC hour, which doesn't even turn out to be it's not even an hour a week. Right. When you look at all the days that actually turn out to be PLC days. So I don't think that saying we're going to put the mentorship into PLC time is an appropriate use of it. So I just really want us to pay attention to all the fresh new teachers we have and support them properly. Having been one at one point in my life, I remember the hives clearly that I had for 2 years, which were considered to be an acceptable place to be when you were a new teacher. And so I would like us to keep our eye on that ball if and when we can, and if we find extra money in various places. So.
Superintendent Blaine?
Yeah, and thank you, Trustee Higginson, because I agree with you, and I think we need to support our new teachers greatly. My point was also more around the PLC time, an opportunity to collaborate and have discussions. And veteran teachers are sitting beside the young teachers. And those opportunities and connections can grow as it can move along, no matter what the topic is there. So that opportunity is completely supportive of new teachers there. Whether it's shifting into the areas where we need the mentorship in the next steps would be very debatable, and I absolutely agree with you, but we're just not sure on what that looks like, nor are we prepared staff-wise and everywhere to move forward with it as a major initiative for next year.
I had a quick thought regarding mentorship, and I don't know what we do now for onboarding, but with all of the new teachers that have come on board, it wouldn't cost a lot of money to provide a packet to the new teachers, and just sort of like, here's a little help packet. So here's where you go in the district for your supports at the district administrative center, and who do you go to when you're having problems here. And one of the things that you could put down is have teachers volunteer to provide mentorship to other teachers and list their telephone number so that they can contact them.
So some of, just for that piece, if I could, some of those pieces are being done as we speak.
Sure. Trustee Rowley?
It's so nice to be in a year when we're adding stuff to the district. It's, shocking. It's nice to wrap our heads around. A couple questions I have. Just one is janitorial. I know we had reduced the janitors and then gone to the team model. I haven't yet heard how that's gone. At the time, I had heard that, from teachers and from people within the school system, that we hadn't yet, added them back, and the schools were, there hadn't been that turnaround. So there's that piece. And then the other thing is just more point of information for me is how many EA hours have we added to the system with this new budget?
What was there last week?
On the first piece around custodians and et cetera, Mr. Sabo presented and his team presented in a meeting prior to this when all the departments were presenting out. And they displayed and showed the data to the board at that time, so it would be in your facilities part of your binder. The data that was acquired by operations, and also the comments there were that under the CEF funding, there's 2.5 FTE of custodians there. And in this budget, as a standalone, there's also, I believe it's a 0.5 safety emergency caretaker position as well. As the board is aware also, with this initiative and these budget strategies, we're accelerating the scrubber purchases, which would make sure that every school would have a scrubber in it, where some schools do not have that, which really support our custodians in their efficiency, effectiveness, and their wellness, as far as some of the bulwark that's necessary to make sure that the hallways and schools are clean for students. And so we're looking at it as a multi-prong piece, and we're hoping that we can continue to support our custodians. With the closure of Rutherford coming up, all CUPE staff hours are being recirculated. None of them are being taken out. Those hours are being maintained in the schools, which have enhanced also some of our school pieces, particularly in the secretarial area, where we're adding, so all of our schools have, I want to say 27 hours now. It's 26, 30, minimum of 30 hours, where secretaries were sometimes their clerical were there right only when the school started and when it ended, so they can be there at the bookends a little bit longer. So we're really making a lot of strides that way. EA time, what we have done, that's formula driven, and so whatever's represented in the formula, number of students and designations, would be also distributed. But the big piece around EA time, these budget strategies refer to about $450,000 that are being taken out of contingency and put directly into Mr. Essinger's ability to staff early. Instead of waiting until September the 30th and October, when those times are coming, they will be able to be released at the staffing dates, and our people can choose their jobs. Hopefully that'll create better continuity in September and October. And of course, there will be we'll be adding as the growth factor occurs in the district, and those hours will be added in September and October. But I think we've made some significant shifts and movements on efficiency, making sure that we get out the right people are linking up with the right students as far as EAs are concerned. You know, they're doing it by choice and not being forced into just picking their jobs.
Great. And with that, let's talk about our next steps.
Okay, so we're just going to pass out an action sheet that was prepared just earlier today. And further to Superintendent Blaine's comments, there is a lot of work involved behind the scenes in order for us to move forward with staffing and to lock down the budget and get it prepared for our next budget meetings with such significant additions that we're talking about. So the recommendation that staff is putting forward is that the business committee recommend that the Board of Education approve in principle the 2018-2019 operating budget on the following basis. That one, the budget initiatives totaling approximately $4.3 million as presented by Superintendent Blaine during the 18-19 budget process are included, and 4 community school coordinators be retained for a 1-year period and funded through the district's accumulated surplus. And I'm just going to stop and also say that the other community school coordinator, so there's 5, is actually funded out of LINC, but that's why it's not referenced in this way in the action sheet. So there are 5 in total that are being retained. And third, just that there are no other substantive changes. In other words, we're not going to eliminate anything more or add anything more to the budget than what you've already seen in this process. So nothing else would be reflective in the annual operating budget bylaw that we present to you in the coming weeks. Just, again, looking for someone to move that motion if the board is comfortable going in that direction.
Trustee Brennan?
Well, I would move 1 and 2, but 3 kind of presumes that that trustees will not consider or make or propose other changes. And that kind of, can't do that, right? So 1 and 2 are okay for me, if that's seconded, but 3 is to be dealt with as we proceed.
I would agree.
Superintendent?
Just a suggestion, maybe to trustee Brennan as well, is that anything that you want to make changes on there, that would be fine. The intent here is that we can move forward with some of with the staffing and et cetera. I do know there's some pieces out there around some transportation discussions occurring, those types of things, and as always, we can move and shape that. But if we did do that, we would be looking at, once again, what we'd have to take out and move back in and those types of things. So, yeah.
Trustee Ray?
Thank you. Just for clarity. So we move forward with this, and the intent of this is so we can move, like you just said, move on the staffing. Otherwise, we are in a holding pattern until we actually pass the budget before we can move on staffing. This enables us to, or you guys, to get a start on staffing now. And like Trustee Brennan said, if we decide that we want to add or subtract some things, we can still do that, but this enables you to start on the staffing piece, right?
Yeah, and I think it also assumes that the board in general is pleased with what's there. We're not looking at something major or substantial that we need to totally rebuild what we've done here. Those types of things. So it's that vote of confidence that we just move forward.
Rob Steer?
And that's one of my questions was around number 3, because without seeing a full document, you don't know if there may be tweaks or changes that you might quite be aware of, that just because of some alignments may have been lost. And a lot of that will come easier with us, but as you say, when we get into staffing, because we only need a 2-week notice, not a more substantiated. But when we do move into trying to figure out how to staff some of the major changes that are happening in certain departments, we would like to be able to get that done quicker, and with the idea. So, but still, without the full document, it's tough to say.
Next I have on the list is Trustee Brzezicki.
Thank you. I think I might be having a moment of, I don't know. I guess for me, item number 1 and number 2, especially number 1, because number 1 is the one that's budget initiatives totaling $4.3 million. That's what's going to cover adding our admin time for our senior VPs, et cetera, all of these other new initiatives. If we pass 1 and 2, that should be enough to allow you to do staffing, or at least to begin moving ahead enough on staffing. I can't see why you need 3.
I think the intention was we just suggest to the board, if there's something major, please tell us now. That's why we've been having these discussions. It's more coming from our side to suggest, if there's a big dollar figure and you want to do something different, can we have those ideas so we can help do that?
And the intent of number 3 wasn't necessarily that the board couldn't choose to add or delete. It was to give you some assurance that if you're saying yes to staff, move forward, we approve all of these additions in principle, and we can get to the work behind the scenes. It was more to assure you that staff will not be putting anything in or out of the budget than what we've already talked about. It was more to provide you with assurance.
Jennifer, do you have a question? Did you have a question?
Yeah, just to the chair. UPAC hasn't had an opportunity to present any of this information to our members. Our meeting isn't until the last week, so that our objection would be to.
The DPAC president and I have been meeting on probably 3 times over the last 2 months, and I met with her on Tuesday to go over some of that as well. And I'm not sure of how the communication is broken out from there, but yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
As past president, I can speak to that. I spoke with the president this afternoon, and we reviewed all the documents that have come out to date. We've had a significant number of parents come forward saying that they wish to discuss this at our meeting, because they were very concerned about a number of initiatives that they saw in the budget information that was provided in the education committee. And after an hour-long discussion, that we're heading into an executive meeting tomorrow, that we can present more information to our membership at the end of the month. We are asking for more time to get feedback from our membership.
Well, certainly, the budget will not be presented to the board as an entire budget until May the 3rd or 4th. And if DPAC had some concerns, we can bring that back at that time to the board and make our recommendation. So if DPAC wants to send me their concerns, we can take a look at that and see what we can do.
So I think we're kind of in a position here where we're sort of afraid that we're casting this thing in cement without the ability to make changes. And I think what we're hearing is that we retain the ability to make changes, but we do need to move forward. And part of the intent of the language in number 3 was to assure the trustees and the communities at large that all the stuff that they're looking at isn't going to change on them by anything that staff does. So anything that does change, it'll be because of the presentations and because of the feedback we get and because of decisions that trustees make moving forward. But staff need the opportunity to move forward with this so that we can move on with staffing. So I think it's sort of an issue of trust. Trustee Brennan?
Yeah, well, we haven't seen the budget yet in its entirety. I prefer to work from a total budget package with all the line items in it. So you can refer to them when you're considering changes. And for my part, I don't see any significant, I have no multi-million-dollar cuts and no multi-million-dollar additions to the budget as it stands. I think it's an exceptional time to look at a budget like that. Having experienced budgets of, cutting $5 million and $3 million and cutting positions and all this angst that creates. I think I think staff's done a good job of approaching this from an educational point of view. Where are the needs and addressing those needs? So I don't see, but I do need that full package to assess how I feel and what I'm going to do.
Superintendent Blaine?
Yeah, to Trustee Brennan's concerns, and I agree, it feels different because of that we're not looking at going through line by line and saying, here are the places that we can cut and wanting to know the rationale about why we're maintaining things when you're trying to pull money out. So it will feel and look a little different to the trustees. So with this recommendation, then what we would go ahead and do is put these things into the budget so that the next one you see line by line will have this in it. And so then when you go through line by line, you can see exactly what you're agreeing to and not agreeing to, and you'll see the balance, that it's a balanced budget with all of that in it. And then if you want to make any changes or shifts at that time, through the conversations, that's great. So it will be a little bit different as you walk through it, and it might feel a little uncomfortable. But as you say, we haven't been in this position.
No, usually we're walking in the valley of the shadows, yeah. Not this year, thank you.
Yeah.
Trustee Bradley's on the list next.
Okay. Well, I think we've heard from folks. I would move that we accept 1 and 2. If number 3 was worded, will be reflective until the annual operating budget bylaw, that would be awaiting input, awaiting trustee decisions, budget's what we do. So I would move, we accept 1 and 2. That's simple. Yes. They moved. Yeah, that motion's already on the table, so.
Has it been seconded?
Point of order, where was that motion on the table?
By Trustee Brennan, second by Trustee Brodsky.
Okay, so I'll agree then.
I don't think we have a second.
Trustee Brodsky. I thought Trustee Brodsky did, yeah.
Trustee Higginson.
I'll be a second.
So I guess I'll be a lone wolf. I'm just not in support of this recommendation at this point. I understand, and maybe I don't understand, but this doesn't feel like our budget process to me. It just doesn't feel. Maybe I'll get a clarifying question here. This is so that we can move forward with the staffing as opposed to positions we've been in before where we're cutting staffing and we want to start working on those positions. But it doesn't make sense to me that we would post and staff those positions before the budget's been approved. I feel like we're kind of skipping a few steps and then we're going to maybe go back. And I think there's, you know, one of the proposals that I was gonna make was that I don't think we need our working session tomorrow, because I think we're all on the same train going in the same direction right now. But I don't see the need for this a proven principle when we're hearing from people that they haven't had enough time to even meet with. So I'm just not in support of the recommendation or the 1 and 2 or anything.
And again, I appreciate the feeling, because it does feel uncomfortable for all of us. Maybe I could just give you a scenario. So, and I'll just focus in on principals and vice principals. In order for principals and vice principals to design the staffing in their schools to the best, and to be able to pull out the .2s and 3s to make full-time positions in the schools, they are actively now creating the postings that will be going out at the May the 10th, in the first round. So I'm just trying to think of my dates here. In the first round. The first round goes out in a week and a half. By the first round goes out, it notifies the potential positions that we have. We are able to change that still until we begin to hire the teachers, and then it becomes complicated. So May the 10th is the second round. If you work yourself backwards from May the 10th, our ability to post these positions and get them out there and have the work done would be positive, but not the hiring piece. The hiring piece comes in the last week, and the board by then would have approved the budget, or there'd be greater conversation. So we're doing a 3 weeks worth of work over those 3 weeks behind the scenes and preparing to go there. We don't want the board to be in a position that they didn't know that we were out there moving on these other, on the additional positions or any of the nuances. So we're trying to give our staff the opportunities to have a look at what this will mean to them out there. And it's not just 40 FTE. In the teaching ranks, 20 FTE of additional teaching time may affect 200 teachers per se, of different types of jobs and positions within their individual schools. And that's just the administrative time. So I think what we're trying to suggest is it gives us an opportunity to move forward in a respectful way, both by the board and et cetera. Everyone knows in this room that if there's a shift or change in what's in the staffing and et cetera, we can move towards that. And it maintains our staffing pieces around as getting our 3 rounds of staffing in to meet our contractual obligations as well. So that's a little bit of the thought process here. Otherwise, we would hold our staffing sheets that we're preparing that would delay the first round of staffing till after May the 10th, because we were talking about voting the bylaws to the budget after that, and that pushes everything out another month and a half, which puts us into June, into July, in our third round of postings for teachers. It delays all of the QP job days, posting days, and et cetera, and those types of things. So it is complicated, and in the past, the board would, when we moved to staffing at the same time as budget process, and the board allowed us to do that because they knew that they were not going to go into the ratio of staffing of teacher versus our ratio of 25:1, because for cost savings, we took it elsewhere. We took it away from the classroom. So they allowed us to move forward. Well, as you can tell, the times have changed where we're hiring, and it's changed the whole dynamics. And I hope that makes sense to you. We have no problem in delaying, if that's the board's will, and it's on the open process here for that. Yeah.
So I'm going to hand the gavel over to Trustee Solomon and make a friendly amendment. And I realize your motion is for items 1 and 2, and I would propose as a friendly amendment that we add the number 3, but change the wording. And what I've come up with, and and I'll say it, and then if I get a seconder, I'll speak to it. No other substantive changes, eliminations, or additions will be reflective in the annual operating budget bylaw 2018-19 unless added by the board or added after partner groups and the community have had an opportunity for feedback. And I think sorry, I need a second.
That's friendly enough.
The mover says that's friendly enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we want to do what's best for kids, but we want to make sure that the community has an opportunity to look at what's been presented so far and an opportunity to feedback on the budget and allow ourselves, we don't want to cut ourselves off at the knees and not be able to make changes. And so the wording was sort of problematic, but I think this satisfies the need to allow the community the opportunity to take the time to review everything, provide feedback, and it enables us, it still gives us the opportunity as a board to make changes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I support the change. It does state what I wanted us to feel we had, and that's the authority to make changes. And also, it's a good point to acknowledge the need to have input from our partner groups. So I do support it, and it is the board's budget, so it will be ours. But I also appreciate that there are some areas of instruction that are highly competitive, and we have to get out there and get them when we can. And that would be French immersion, some shop teachers, other specialist teachers, that psychologists, so for example, that we need to recruit rather than just wait till they come and see us. So I think it's wise for staff to have the authority to go out there and start the process now.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? Denise, she was next on. Denise,
I just wanted to add that the board has signed a letter of understanding with the NDTA that the first round postings are April 19th, which is next Thursday. And if schools are going to be staffed in order to have postings put, it's educationally better for schools and kids to know what their complement of staffing is, so that they can, as Trustee Brennan said, recruit teachers and have the postings that are going to look the way they're going to look probably in September, or at least as close as they can. So I understand the discomfort, and I'm glad I'm not voting on this, but just providing that information. Thank you.
Trustee Noah?
Trustee Noah. I'll take it. Yeah, and the wording, the new wording of number 3 is, to me, the same as leaving number 3 out. My concern is that number 3 was even in there in the first place, because the board needs to gather the data and then approve the budget. So, being elected means listening first, then making a decision after we've had a chance to listen. So my concern is that it was even there in the first place. That's all I got.
Trustee Rezovic?
Can you just, Mr. through the chair to Trustee Kimmer, can you just reread me your amendment, the last part of it?
Sure. So it's number 3. Unless added by the board or added after partner groups and the community haven't had an opportunity.
Rather than added, unless proposed by the board, and it's really friendly, because what if we decide we want to eliminate something? We think, oh, maybe, not that we necessarily will, but it's not just adding, it's eliminating.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Question on the amendment?
Yes, call a question.
This
calls for a vote.
Yes. Do we have a second?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we voting? I thought it was a friendly amendment.
Yeah.
So we don't need to vote on a friendly amendment. Okay.
Friendly amendment.
Call a question.
I wanted to speak to her one more time. I think that it sounds
pass
like...
the gavel.
You gotta pass the gavel back.
You don't get it. You're getting used to having that thing, eh? Nice to have a little weapon.
It was good on you, Jeff.
I think that I really appreciate you. We're in a different time here. We're talking about, instead of cuts, we're talking about adding about 40 40 groups. And so this is a different process that we're involved with, and I really appreciate the amendment, because I think people do want to still have the say in terms of the final product, and I think this allows for it, and but also acknowledging on many different fronts that we need to go ahead in terms of the staffing. We're adding staff, and we need to make sure that we have the opportunity to add these people in a prompt amount of time, so I'm very supportive.
So, thank you. The question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Opposed by trustee Higginson. Motion carries.
Just to finish up my report then, I'd like to thank the board for their support and trust, and also reiterate the fact that if there's changes or shifts that the board feels that it's important, we hope you'll come and ask us for the information, and get into a healthy dialogue, and we'll work with you as we move along. Thank you very much.
Sure. So we're moving on to 8.5 and hearing from the Director of Planning and Operations, Mr. Pete Sable, regarding Rutherford to Frank J. Ney transportation.
Excuse me.
And I hope to be done by 8.
Thanks, and good evening. I wanted to. I haven't said anything. Thank you. I have yeah. So in keeping with the busing theme, we want to stay on schedule, and Dave and I have our eye on the speed limit here. So we'll see what we can do. I want to thank you, and I want to thank Dave Primo for coming tonight, our manager of transportation, and he's going to help me out if I get stuck on a few details or trying to provide some information. The item is in your agenda package, and you'll find the information sheet starting on page 30, and then behind that you'll find some route sheet information and then some transit information. And I'm just going to highlight a few things on the sheet just to make sure. I don't know if you're like me, but I can work a lot of numbers, and then I get confused by bus schedules and things. So it takes me a little bit of a moment to go through that and understand. So we'll make sure that we all understand that part of it. I put the motion up here because I wanted to let trustees know that we have in fact investigated the cost. And we have investigated the ridership, but sort of in a passive way. We didn't actively look to find out how many people would be riding the bus. What we did was we looked at the cost of a bus, which will hold 84 elementary school students, and then we offered a shuttle option, which would allow us to put a second bus on if the ridership was such that demanded it. And that's a practice that I think we've used in the past, where we're not sure what the rider is, but we have the ability to put on an overload bus. We're going to talk tonight about three basic options. One is adding a trip to an existing route. One is adding a new route. And one to speak to is that there is some transit services available along that corridor. So a few assumptions were made in putting the information together, and these assumptions were just made by staff because the motion didn't speak to some of them. So they can be changed or altered if we want to add a new set of assumptions in. And one was that we would investigate all the options, and we think we covered the significant ones. We have the route from Rutherford to Frank J. Ney. So we have the bus actually marshalling at Rutherford School, so the students would have to go to Rutherford School, and then the bus would go directly to Frank J. Ney with no stops. So that's covering marshalling at one point and the express route. And of course, I did speak to the shuttle option, where the cost doesn't include the shuttle option, but we believe the shuttle option can be added at a minimal additional cost if required. So it's really not that much of an issue to speak about tonight. And I didn't want to put a bunch of numbers in front that might just cause information overload. So I've taken this information out of the package. So adding a trip to an existing route is limited due to the other trips on the route. So this bus is out servicing a Pleasant Valley already. It was affected by the elimination of a previous route, a previous trip on the route that we did through the annual route review process. And so that bus has to be available to begin the second part of the trip. So you can see here that I've combined it for shuttles, but assume that there wasn't a shuttle and there was just one bus. It would leave the Rutherford site at 7:39, and it would arrive at Frank J. Ney at 7:47. The bell goes at Frank J. Ney at 8:38, so it's approximately 50 minutes ahead of school start time. If you look at that and say, okay, that bus is now overloaded and there's more than 84 passengers on that bus wanting to get on the bus, then we would add a shuttle service. And that shuttle service would have to go earlier, not later, because it still needs to get all the students to the school. So you can see then that that shuttle service is backed up by another 15 minutes or so, the time it takes the bus to get back and forth the second time. And in the afternoon, we can see here that the bus would leave at, if there was one bus, it would leave at 3:28, and the bell goes at 2:30, so it's about 58 minutes after the bell goes for that option. I'll be pleased to answer any questions as we go along. I'll just continue.
Trustee Higginson.
This might not be a question that you can answer because it's kind of outside of facilities, but does the proposal and the cost include some type of supervision cost in there? Because if kids are getting to school an hour before and are hanging out an hour after, I know right now at my son's school, it's like 20 minutes and you're out is the rule. You can hang out and kick the ball for 20 minutes and then you got to get going. So do we have supervision? My assumption is that we would need to then have supervision at the school.
We haven't discussed it with the school yet as to whether or not there's any adaptations that can be made in their supervision now, but this does not include anything other than the busing.
Busing, okay.
Yeah, just a pure transportation.
Thanks.
So option 2 would be a completely new route. So there's no trips on a new route to encumber or limit when that bus can come and go. So then we can align that bus with the bell time. So you can see that if only one bus was needed, we can look at shuttle 2, and that would be that the bus would leave Rutherford site at about 8:22, and it would arrive at Frank J. Ney at 8:30, leaving 8 minutes to the bell. And so that's designed by Dave Prevost, and of course that's changeable because it is the one bus on the route. That's the one trip on that route. And then leaving, of course, we can align it up with the bell times, and we've left 10 minutes. So the bus would leave at 2:40, and then you can see if it had to do a second run, that would be a little bit later for those students. Now, staff did go on the transit website and planned a trip from Rutherford Elementary to Frank J. Ney. And the transit website shows, if you tell it a location like Rutherford School, it'll tell you how long it takes to walk to the nearest stop, and then it'll tell you when the pickup is at the stop and when you're dropped off, and then it'll tell you how long the walk is to the location that you've told them what your destination is. So this isn't walking to the bus, this isn't the walk to the school, this is the actual bus ride itself. So it would pick up near, and I've worked it in reverse, so it would drop off near Williamson and Hammond Bay at 8:09 in the morning. And then it takes about 5 or so minutes, 5, 6, depending, to walk to the school from there. So you get to the school about 8:15, 8:20 at the latest, and the bell goes at 8:38. So you're 18 minutes, essentially, off the bell time in the morning. And then I put the other pickup times, because it does actually stop along Hammond Bay. Yes?
Trustee Higgins.
Does Frank Ney have other buses?
Frank Ney does not have any other buses.
So is it possible then to adjust the bell time to, I mean, it's really early, but going back to the first one that you proposed in terms of keeping the route on, it would be an early drop-off and then a later pickup, but is it possible to adjust the bell times to make it more
It's always possible. Again, we have not discussed it with the school. Those are some of the things that we can begin to look at once we get an idea of the direction that the board is choosing.
And then in the afternoon, you can see that the bell goes at 2:30. Well, I should say that this doesn't speak to, there is one day a week that's got an earlier drop-off. It's got an earlier bell time. I don't speak to that in this. I'll just do the other 4 days. This just speaks to the other 4 days of the week. And so this one, the bell goes at 2:30 and then the bus picks up at 3:06. So with that walk time, the bus is there. It's about 30 minutes at the school or so, 25 minutes, and then they have to walk up to the bus. Would have to walk up to the bus. And then you can see just how short that bus ride is. They're on the bus at 3:06 and they're starting to get dropped off their stops at 3:11, 3:13, 3:15 in the afternoon. I think the information sheet speaks to the considerations quite well. We talk a little bit about the grandfathering in the past for school closures. So when we're dealing with a school closure item such as this, that's some of the things I've considered. Some discussion about whether or not the board would approve or consider approval for 1 year, and then gives the staff and the board the opportunity to review the metrics of the trip, what it actually cost, how many students rode it, how successful was that with subscription to the service, depending on the option taken, and of course the ride times. Some parents may choose, more parents may choose a different option than another. Then, of course, there's sustainability of the option. One option being less, but the metrics of the arrival times not being quite aligned. The availability of transit, which kind of splits the two options. And while you don't get, it's not the exact same service as you get with the school bus, it does provide a midterm option there. And then, of course, I've made a mistake there and added sustainability of options twice, not trying to emphasize it. I think that's just a mistake in my preparation. And then the last one is just that staff are always considering what are the alignments with the existing policies and procedures. So what decisions being made by the board and how does it align with the policy, ongoing alignment of other routes and considerations with the policies and procedures.
Trustee Relic had a question. Just that last slide, under considerations, I would add, like from a community perspective, one is little kids taking a city bus. So I would add safety. And the other thing is parents. Like as a single dad, starting work at 8:30 with little ones, just like the whole option of riding the bus to school, trying to get to work on time, wouldn't have been possible. So there could also be other outcomes with the transit option. Do you know what I mean? As far as safety goes. So there's a little bit more, I think, considerations from a community perspective. But yeah, I'd like to hear from partner groups on that too. If I'm off or on. Sure. Yeah.
Trustee Higginson.
Yeah.
Did we do, I've got a few, so I'm gonna keep going until you stop me. Did we do one of the bus hazard, I can't remember the name of it right now, I'm having a hard time with proper nouns tonight, the bus hazard sheets where we look at the route and determine how many hazards there are and have all the checks and X's?
No, we did not. The route doesn't exist, so we did not. That we just looked at what the motion called for. We did, however, though, look at a route that went along that corridor during last year's annual route review. And and now that was for secondary students along that corridor. And we did, after review, staff put forward the recommendation that we would proceed with the elimination of that route, and the board received that report, and that's the route I referred to earlier, or that's the trip I referred to earlier that was removed and plans to be removed for next year. So after due consideration of all of the policy items, and there's 11, I believe, that's the direction staff went in. So the significant difference between this route run and the one we reviewed is the age of the students. Trustee Ray?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like,
Before you do.
sure.
You're doing it again. You're gonna be a trustee. You're gonna be. Rob Zver.
Thank you.
Respected trustee.
Through the chair to Pete, I know in option 2, when you said if it was a new route, why would you limit the new route to be only at the Rutherford site of pickup rather than making it more fluent to the other ones where they would have pickup sites, so some of the concerns of how far the kids would have to travel wouldn't be there. They could be picked up. It's only about probably an additional 10 minutes a day that might be added to the run, because it's just going into a neighborhood back out and around. That was given no other than, and it seems quite expensive to take somebody for a 6-minute run, rather than getting them close where the parents don't have to try to figure out if they're the farthest reach, how quickly can they get into Rutherford and home. So if you were to create Route 2, you would have thought that would have been in consideration of a little bit more of a geared run rather than just to a site. I get Route 1 as being an option because the bus has to go elsewhere in the timelines, but.
Through the chair. Thanks for re-emphasizing the initial assumptions, which we did. We did not try to expand sort of what we thought was the core of the ask, which was to. However, that is quite possible, and again, one of those adjustments we could make. We call it marshalling. At one point, we could in fact pick up students along the way or do a loop through the neighborhood on that option.
Could I just add that CAST has come out and done the Safe Walk with all of the schools, and that information is not presented in this presentation, because I know specifically at Frank J. Ney, the RCMP officers spoke to the fact that walking is not safe from Rutherford to Frank J. Ney.
I appreciate the information, and maybe we can get that information since we don't have it.
So the study that's going on is in fact in progress, and so we don't have the results of the study. So it would have to give an interim report, and that wasn't envisioned as part of this. Although we are looking at and speaking with the community about identifying the options for other modes of getting to the school, and it was brought up. I understand that those items, I had heard those anecdotally, so, but I don't have any official report.
More? Or? Trustee Ray?
I'd like to make a motion. And if I get a seconder, I'll speak to it. I'd like to make a motion that the board or the business committee adopt option 2 for 1 year. And we discuss, that'll give us time to discuss and figure out how.
I'll second it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And I'll speak to it. So basically, if we go with option 2 for 1 year, it'll give our staff time to sift through this thing and figure out exactly what Rob was saying about potentially extra stops. We will decide. What's important, though, in this is that it's part of our transportation policy, that abide by the guidelines of our transportation policy. I think it would be dangerous to grandfather routes, but I think that this route, if this motion is passed, would follow the same criteria as the rest of the transportation policy for 1 year.
Trustee Brennan?
Thank you, Chair. I support the recommendation because it does give us a year to determine the ridership. And the route can be altered. I know Mr. Sabo knows where everyone lives. I don't know if he's got that off Facebook, but I've seen these maps on his wall that show dots, and these represent student homes. And so he can determine where people live who are going to be moving from Rutherford to Frank J. Ney. And with Mr. Prévost's assistance, he can determine a route that will accommodate the majority of those students who wish to take the bus. And so the route can be determined on that basis rather than just sort of fit it in, because that's where the road is. And I think after 1 year we'll have a clear view of whether it's necessary to continue or not.
Next up on the list is trustee. Oh, did you want to speak?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
Just to inform the board that if the board does decide to go in this direction, the cost is around $43,000. We are in a fortunate position with the budget as we just talked about. I believe we can find that out of operating, and that's where I would be looking for it. And it would be reflected in the operating budget that you'll see in the following, once it's approved by the board in its finality.
Trustee Berzovich?
Thank you. Initially, when I first thought about this and first read all this in our packages, when we got our packages a few days, last week, I was more leaning towards the grandfathering so that people could have the consistency of knowing that it was going to be there for a while. But in retrospect, I'm going to support this motion, and the reason I'm going to support it is still, even if we go this route and we do it in the way where the route will be reviewed through the review process next year, we still as a board have a right to, when we get that report, say, no, we want to keep this. You know, even if it's recommended that we not keep it in a year, we still have the right to say, no, we disagree. So I don't think we're shutting anything down by doing it this way. We're just, and it gives it more credibility by allowing it to be under the transportation policy and under that route review process. So I would support that. I did have a question I didn't get a chance to ask, and I don't know if it's appropriate. I'll leave it, but I do have a question at some point for after the motion.
Trustee Higginson.
So I mentioned earlier that I have a number of questions, so I'm just going to start firing then. Currently, what is the limit for students? There's, you might have to walk, I think it's up to 3 kilometers to get to your bus stop if you're currently riding a bus. Is that correct? Is it up to 3? 3.2. 3.2. And so this is a bus route that's actually shorter than even the distance that some of the students in the district currently might have to walk to just catch the bus. And
yes, if you look from Rutherford itself to Frank J. it's 2.7.
Okay.
Yes.
How many elementary?
But that doesn't take into account the farthest student.
The farthest student.
Correct.
On the very far end. Yeah, I hear you. Okay. How many elementary students do we have in the district?
Possibly.
Elementary students?
About 8,000.
About 8,000. Do we know how many elementary students do we currently bus?
Through the chair, I believe it's about 10%.
About 10%. So about 800 students, elementary students we bus. So there's about 7,200 elementary students who currently find their own ways to school. Okay. So here's my concern with this proposed motion. This 1 year thing. It is really hard, as we have seen, to cancel a bus route. And I feel like we have time, actually, still in this year, to answer a number of the questions that people are asking. We don't know if this is, we're not talking about 84 or 94 kids. How many go on a bus?
84.
We're talking about a lot of kids. We're not talking about one bus here. We're talking about either a shuttle service or more than one bus. And we are, I think about the Mountain View bus, where kids do have to walk 3.2 kilometers to get to the bus stop, where there are no sidewalks on any of those routes. The roads are narrow. Sometimes they're actually even flooded. And so I think we're opening ourselves up here to a big floodgate of requests for buses by doing something this quickly. It's not that I'm necessarily opposed to this, but once you put a bus route on, it's really hard to take it off. And I don't think it's financially prudent of us to put this bus route on for 1 year. I don't think that's fair to the community if it's only going to be a 1 year thing while we get our act together to answer the questions that we all have asked. So I currently do not support the motion as it stands for 1 year because there are still many questions, including the fact that what do we do with the other 7,200 kids, elementary age students who manage to get themselves to school every day? Because that is the case. And I don't want to sound crass, like I don't understand the desires of the community that's affected here. We have made a decision to close the school, and it's a really hard decision. But part of the reason was so that we could direct our funding towards educational needs that we have. And it's very difficult, as we have seen in the past, to take a bus off. And in the past, this board has also decided not to grandfather the busing situation from Barsby from Cinnabar to Barsby. So it seems like it's a really kind of, we're just kind of throwing things around to see where we should put a bus, and I think there's some consistency that's required. So at this time, I think personally, we have more time to get answers, since we've just heard from the superintendent that there's some money in the budget, in order to be able to do this properly and thoughtfully, and make sure that it's the right thing to do for the district as a whole, and also for the community that's been affected by the school closure decision that we made.
Trustee Solomon?
I am going to support the motion. I have a lot of concerns as well, specifically about the cost. It's a tremendous cost for an 8-minute run. The fact is, though, that we are closing that school, and a lot of parents are concerned about how they will navigate the route, and so we're taking some responsibility. That is not the same issue as adding a catchment school from Cinnabar to Cedar. There's a bus that goes there because that's our catchment school. We're eliminating a school here, and we have some concerns and some responsibilities in that regard. I don't wish it to go past a year for reconsideration. I know very, very well that it's extremely difficult to eliminate a service, and we'll have to see how this service is being used, and it's going to be reevaluated in the transportation policy, as all our routes are, in terms of the ridership, and that's for consideration on a yearly basis, I believe. And this route would have to be considered as the same way. There may be changes. There may be children that will that live closer to McGurk, perhaps, and there may be spaces, and they may wish to transfer to McGurk. We don't know. It would be reassessed. But I will support this. The bottom end is I will support this for the 1 year.
Trustee Ralph?
I will support this motion, and the reason why is, like Trustee Higginson said, we don't have the data yet, but anybody that drives the Hammond Bay corridor in the morning, that's much different than walking kilometers out at Mountain View. And I'd invite anybody to take a little elementary student and try to walk along Hammond Bay for 1, 2, 3 kilometers. So as a stopgap, like Trustee Solomon said, for closing a school, it just makes sense until we have the safety data, and that was a good point by the DPAC chair, just about us awaiting that data, so makes sense.
So in the interest of time, we've heard from a number of people who support the motion and one who does not. I'm wondering if there's anybody else that would like to speak against the motion. If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? Trustee Higginson is opposed. Motion carries.
Tanya's asking a question.
Yes, sure.
While you're still up there, Mr. Trevo, and I apologize, because I probably, and you, Mr. Trevo, I probably asked you this before, but if at some point it were decided that instead of having the route be express, that you would do stops, is there any kind of significant financial difference?
Maybe I can go first. I don't believe there's very many other locations to make stops safely along that corridor. The transit bus doesn't have, I think it has one other stop, and then it goes straight to Frank J. Ney. So that's something we would have to review. It is possible. And Dave, if you want to speak.
Yeah, all I would say is the Hammond Bay corridor, as Trustee Oertley said, is a busy place, very narrow. There's really no place to pull a bus off other than using transit stops, and they don't like that. They get a little angry with us when we do that. So if we were to implement new stops, I would say it would be back off of Hammond Bay in the subdivisions and behind, and come in through the back way into Frank Ney.
Thank you both for your work and your presentation. I appreciate it. Trustee Robinson has a brief comment that he'd like to make, but you guys can sit down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and you don't have to listen.
Having heard his brief comments before, I think you should sit down.
I've been concerned about after-school childcare for parents with their kids having to deliver them down to Frank J. Ney. If we're bringing them back by bus, I suspect that many of our parents who have current after-school childcare arrangements will be able to continue with those same arrangements. So we're solving two problems here.
Thank you. So moving on to 10.1, unfinished business, Secretary Treasurer McVeigh regarding a memorial plaque for June Harrison.
I believe this is under unfinished business because it came up at a previous business committee meeting that there was a motion with regards to a memorial plaque. And Trustee Brendan, I believe we were waiting for you to be back so that we could pick your brain a little bit about your recollection of what that was supposed to be or what it was to look
In
like.
recognition of Trustee Harrison's long service, contribution to the district, her ribald sense of humor, and just her devotion to the welfare of children. And I think mostly just because of her endurance that she put in that length of time as a trustee, starting in the 80s. I think she was first elected in 1986 for a 2-year term, and every other term till she retired. And I think it's good to recognize, I mean, we recognize others. It's not so bad to recognize someone from our own midst from time to time who we respect and want to see noted.
Thank you. Also, while we're talking about recognizing people, we haven't had the opportunity yet to formally congratulate the Learning Services team changes, and specifically congratulations to the Deputy Superintendent, Tim Davey, Assistant Superintendent, Robin Gray, and Assistant Superintendent, Laura Tate. Congratulations. Do you want to?
Yeah, and maybe in conversation with Trustee Brennan, just through my experiences as a principal and recognition and trying to be consistent, I'm wondering if the board is interested in creating some guidelines as to how you recognize former trustees and length of service, of passing, all those types of things, and so there's a criteria, and then we can help support and just get it into an annual process. Is there a recognition when they leave the first time? And I know sometimes that you come back, double duty award or whatever.
Often it's the citizens that determine that.
Yeah, that's right. But you know what I mean, and then it takes the popularity piece out, that if their long time service is X, they receive Y. Those types of things. So
that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Superintendent, I think if we develop those criteria, then we'll have some standards by which to determine whether somebody fits them or not. So put that first and see if she fits.
Okay.
Last item.
I'll just offer, if you want to email me back and forth, we can put together 2 or 3 pieces.
Sure.
Present it back next month.
Yep.
And then we can move forward, and that would give possibly Dale, Communications and Secretary Treasurer look at kind of what types of things we could do.
And maybe look at other districts, see whether they do that.
Yeah, sure.
7-foot tall bronze statue, I think.
So we have no new business. We have no for information. I'm assuming we have no questions.
Do you want to cancel the meeting tomorrow?
Yeah, I don't think we need the meeting for tomorrow.
I think you need to just
wait.
announce it.
But so the announcement is that tomorrow we're not going to meet, so you can feel free to go golfing if it's not raining. Move to adjourn by Trustee Berzovich, seconded by Trustee Higginson. All in favor? We're out of here.